All right, so we're out here in your beds of peas. Can you talk a little about, like, your experiences with growing peas and things that you might want to share?
Yeah, we've been growing southern peas, cowpeas, pretty much the whole time we've been farming, both as a cover crop and as a cash crop. Here's a real, a legume crop. Provide protein, but grows on poor soils with low fertility, very low input, and can certainly handle hot, dry weather, which we often, have in this part of the country during the summer. And it's a short duration crop where we can, double crop it with other things, either in the field or in the greenhouse. We've done it at a range of scales, and used to do it sort of at the half-acre scale, even using the roll down, plant through, no-till techniques with the 2-row planter. Done that very effectively. As we've kind of scaled back, we've actually been growing cowpeas in the greenhouse, which we'll show in a second, to sort of double crop before our fall crops, following something like onions. It's fine in the hot conditions. And then even out here, this was planted at like a cover crop spacing where we drilled it like 6 inches apart instead of a wider planter row. And really you're seeing, we've had a lot of rain, but a really good yield. So it's been a solid crop for us. And early on we did get a grant through the state to get a pea bean sheller. So at one point we were selling wholesale shelled peas.
Fresh shelled peas.
Yeah, fresh shelled peas.
Cool. So when do these guys go in the ground?
I mean, you start planting them anytime, after frost, but they're going to do fine. We probably planted these in early July, I believe.
Okay. Any varieties that you guys like growing in terms of like that do well here in North Carolina, and also like flavor wise and stuff like that too?
It's our pink eye purple hull. We like those. It tend to be the one that if we're going to grow one, that's the one we choose.
Well, they're easy to identify in the field because when they're ready to be shelled, they tend to be solid purple pods that stands out from the green foliage. We experimented with several varieties when we were doing more commercial scale to see which ones sort of grew and shelled out better, and really we come back to the pink eye purple hull. Seems to shell out the best, really high yields, and again, because of that purple hull, it's easy to both identify in the field and especially on the processing side if you want to pull out any shell pieces that make it through. We've done companion plantings with it, but this is all no-till beds we did, where we just pulled back the mulch and following a previous crop and drilled it through. The greenhouse soil is exposed, so that just gets push seeded, and then we've done it with the rolling down rye vetch cover crop and drilling through that. So there's a lot of versatility in how you plant these.
All right, so you guys grow peas out in the field and also in the greenhouse. What's the reasoning? Just to get a different succession, or?
We actually haven't ever grown them in the greenhouse before, I don't think, before this year, but we had bed space and we had extra seed, and we're trying to find some place where we didn't have to do it in our huge 300-foot field bed. So it's kind of an experiment, and it's been good.
Did these grow any faster than out in the field?
Actually, surprisingly, they're ready to harvest around the same time. I'm not really sure.
Okay.
Maybe.
Well, because you guys planted them in the summer, so.
Yeah. So not much difference. It's just more that we have more planted.
Okay. Can you talk a little about harvesting, maybe?
Yeah. So, like Bobby was saying, the color is really helpful with this variety. If you can kind of see, they start out green, and then they start turning where maybe this side's still green, the edges, and then once they're ready, they're burgundy. You can still pick them when they've got a little bit of green on them. Like I would pick this, but I can also tell that it's swollen, so you can kind of see the swollen peas inside. This one is a little far gone. If we're doing freshly shelled peas, this is almost dried out already, where you could just keep it as a dried pea. So that's not ideal. I would usually throw those out or shell them separately and keep them as a dry pea. We do fresh southern peas. Some people would let them dry more on the vine and then harvest them and shell them for already dried peas. But since we're harvesting them fresh and shelling them fresh, you have to either eat them pretty quickly, then they would keep in the fridge for maybe a week, or you shell them, and then what we do is blanch them and freeze them so we have them over the winter. So blanching, just boil them for a couple minutes, cool them down, bag them up in Ziploc bags, put them in the freezer. And it's really nice for me because it's another protein source. And so if we've got dent corn and then southern peas, you've got complete protein coming from the farm that doesn't have to be from animal protein.
Okay, and if you leave them out, they can dry more, and then that's another whole process too?
Yeah, and we haven't actually ever done that. We really like the fresh southern peas, so that's the only process I've taken part in. Unless I find one that's just desiccated, and I would still keep that, and it just takes longer to cook and you store it differently, but we're going for the fresh southern peas.
Okay, and is most of this going to feed your family, or you guys is this leaving the farm too?
Pretty much feeding our family. Since we're doing a smaller scale, we have sold to a couple neighbors, but I like to stock our freezer with these because we love them so much.
Okay, yeah. And you say southern pea, is there a difference with like southern peas versus different
English peas?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so just if you think of the little round green peas, those are what we'd be calling the English pea, and these are different varieties. Like we used to grow Mississippi Silver, black-eyed peas are another variety. These look a lot like black-eyed peas, the pink-eyed purple hull when you harvest them. I'm not really familiar with a lot of other varieties because we really...
That's what you've been growing?
Yeah, we focused in on the ones that we like.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So we just pick them off, we're going to collect them, and then we'll go shell some.
Yep. So these are peas that we picked yesterday, but we knew you were coming and wanted to see us shelling it. So if we're not ready to run the sheller when we pick peas, we put them in the cold storage until we're ready. And then that morning we'll lay them out and then turn on a fan to put some air over them to dry them out a little bit more, make sure there's not condensation on them when we run them through the sheller. They seem to shell out better when they're a little drier. So that's what we've been doing today, and then we're about ready to run the sheller.
Okay, how long do they have to sit out for? It's depending on temperature and humidity and stuff.
Most of the day, usually.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, and is this sort of like a good amount to turn the sheller on, or like what size batches are we usually running?
We put a bushel in at a time, and that's about a 5-gallon bucket, lightly packed with these.
Okay.
But you could run multiple batches if you had more picked, but that's how much can go in.
Yeah, I mean, we've ran up to 15 bushels in one shelling, but the sheller handles 1 bushel effectively.
This is enough to justify running the sheller for sure.
All right, so as they're sitting here, sort of getting ready to go into the sheller, what are you looking for with them to know when they're ready to go in?
The shell's gotten a little bit thinner. It's dried out. It's not as stiff. A lot of the time for sort of drying really depends on the amount of moisture in the field when it's coming out. If it's been a dry period, you don't need to dry it out as long. You can send some of them straight into the sheller. We've had a lot of rain recently, so these are going to need a little bit longer, a little bit more airflow. And again, all that is just to have less shell breakage in the shelling process, and to get them to separate from the shell a lot easier and to run less.
Okay, let's go look at the sheller.
Sure. Yeah, this is a Roto Fingers pea bean sheller that's made by Wellborn Devices in Mississippi, and we got this with a value-added producers grant some years ago, and it's a pretty simple device. I mean, you've got an electric motor that turns this drum. It's kind of a perforated drum that has a separate set of these you call them fingers that counter rotate with the drum that sort of help break loose the shells, and then the peas can work through these slots and then fall down out through a screen where we collect it, but yet it's designed that keeps all the shells inside of this thing that we clean out after each batch.
Okay, so does the drum rotate too, or just the fingers inside?
The drum rotates one direction, and the fingers rotate the other.
Okay.
Yep.
And that breaks them apart, and then the peas come through.
Yep. And
then the shells stay inside.
Yep. And there's two models this company makes. This is kind of their small or home scale model, and like I said, it does about a bushel. And if you're really rolling it out, I mean, a bushel every 20 minutes to clean, to load it, clean it out, reload it, and start probably is around 20 minutes.
Very cool. Let's give it a shot.
Sure.
You ready to shell some peas?
So we're going to load a bushel of peas into the top of the sheller. There's two parts of the drum that you can open. This is the larger one for loading and emptying it. And we just kind of want to get them spread out so they don't clump on one side or another. Nothing really too particular about it. All right. Go ahead and insert this. Lock that down. So we've got two parts. First we turn the drum on, and then we turn on the counter-rotating fingers.
All right, so it's been running for a couple minutes, and definitely the pace slows down, but it still seems like there's still peas coming out, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of slow and steady at this point, but you can see I've been picking out little bits of the shell. That's why we dry it out. The less dried out it is, the more you have some of these that are getting into the final product. But we'll just wait until there are barely any peas to no peas coming out to stop the drum.
So yeah, in between batches, we'll just open this back up. Set that aside. And I just basically dump it out onto the tray and we'll just sort of pull it out. It'll go to the compost.
It
doesn't really matter about keeping it too clean in between batches. When we're done, we'll get a shot back and just clean out any final residue.
Okay, so you take the little hatch off and then just rotate it and everything comes out?
Yep. I'm going to go ahead and reload the next one. Easy peasy, easy peasy.
Easy peasy, huh?
So if you don't have a pea bean sheller like this, you can just hand shell your peas. It takes a little longer, of course, but you can still get to the final product. This one's a little bit, could have been dried out a little more, but normally if you just kind of pull the seam and unzip it, then you can also just hand shell it. I told you earlier I had a Zoom call and I did this for about an hour and I got probably what took 10 minutes to do in the sheller, so it's a time issue. But also when it runs through the sheller, it does slightly bruise it just because of the motion of the fingers in there, so it's not going to have quite as long of a shelf life than if you were to hand shell it. Here's an example of a pea that was kind of desiccated on the vine versus what we want as a fresh pea. So you can see it's much smaller, kind of white, dried out. So that looks more like what you would buy in the store for a black-eyed pea. And this is what's unique about having a fresh pea, where it's just more tender. It takes less time to cook.
And probably tastes a lot better.
Yeah, it does.
Price we paid for this sheller was about $1,600 in 2011, and about $200 in shipping. And that might be a little bit more now, but it's been been using it for 10 years. It's in the same condition that it was, more or less. And being a really easy piece of equipment, simple piece of equipment, I think it lends itself well to being owned by multiple farmers that wanted to share it, or we shell it for other people with or without a fee. Like I said, it's pretty easy. We've been diversified over the years and done a lot of different things, and we just sort of end up falling back on crops and things like that have been pigs, sorghum syrup, southern pears, and cowpeas is things that have been grown in this area for a long time as part of our diet. The dent corns, cornmeal, that just do well here, and we really, I think, encourage cowpeas, southern peas is a great crop for folks to grow at any scale.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing all this.
Yeah.
Thank you.